Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Audio Judo. I'm Kyle.
And I'm Matthew.
And
Hello.
like I just said, this is Audio Judo, your podcast of music discovery. Well, there's a little bit of a delay tonight, isn't there?
Is there?
uh, there is, yeah. There's a bit of a delay between the two of us. That's okay, though. Audio Judo, like I said, is part of the Pantheon Podcast Network. If you're a fan of Audio Judo and you might enjoy one of the other podcasts we produce with Pantheon. Throughline, where host Christian investigates common thread running through an album, is in its second season, and Audio Judo Does Jazz, where host Chris talks about the history and stories behind some of your favorite jazz albums and musicians. We'll be back for another season coming soon. All three of the Audio Judo podcasts are proud members of the Pantheon Podcast Network, like I already mentioned. If you're a music fan, there's something for you on Pantheon with over 100 podcasts in the network to choose from. When you're done listening to Audio Judo, check out some of Pantheon's other shows at pantheonpodcasts.com.
Two things. One, when we rehearsed
Yes.
that, you had a lot more energy on the 100 podcasts
I
on Pantheon.
I did 100 podcasts.
That's better. See? And
I'll
one
do
of
it.
these
I'll
days,
do it. I'll
we're
do
gonna
it more
get through
exciting
that.
next time.
One of these days, we're going to get through that opening flawlessly.
Yeah, flawlessly.
Someday,
Not today, though.
155 tries, still can't get it right.
Not today, my friend. Not today.
So, Kyle.
So, Matthew.
Yes. So we've covered many albums on this program.
Yes.
Some great, some not so great, some masterpieces, some turds. But
Sure.
it is very rare that I feel as strongly about an album or a band like I do for the album that we're covering today. So I have a few favorite bands in my heart, bands that I have been listening to for a long time. Read that. Bands that I've been listening to for my whole life. Rush, 50 years plus, right? Genesis, 40 years plus. Marillion, 40 years plus. Those are the big three bands for me, bands that I go back to over and over again for this program and in my life and just to enjoy and listen to.
Sure.
There are other bands that I love to listen to and will wait for new music like really intensely. But there really hasn't been a band that resonated with me in the same way as those big three bands, Rush, Genesis, Marillion. That is until about 5 years ago, right before the pandemic. And then because of the pandemic, because for me, there's now not a top three, but now there's a top four. Because I am absolutely obsessed with this band, and specifically this album. Today we are talking about the progressive rock band Porcupine Tree and their 2005 album, Deadwing. So right before the pandemic, our little program, Audio Judo, was progressing. I was deeply entrenched in finding new music, trying things out, really focusing on new styles of music and new stuff that I hadn't listened to before. And this band popped up, as it does on Spotify in my suggestions list. And I recognized it to some degree. I recognized the name because back in 2008, they had released an album called Fear of a Blank Planet. It's a very clever play on Public Enemy's Fear of a Black Planet. And I was impressed because although I didn't listen to that whole album in 2008, I listened to one song because Alex Lifeson, guitarist from Rush, played on a song called Anesthetize. And I listened to that song and it was interesting, but for whatever reason, I don't think I was in the headspace in 2008 to really listen to that style of music. So I just kind of put it on the shelf and never really paid much attention to it. And now, this is 11 years later, the pandemic was upon us or very near, and I found an album by a gent named Stephen Wilson, and the album was called The Future Bites. And I thought it was smart and interesting, and I dug into his story a little bit. I actually ended up putting that on our top 5 albums of 2019, I believe. The Future Bites. It turns out he was Porcupine Tree, basically. We'll get to that. He was the guitarist, vocalist, main writer, lyricist, part-time keyboardist, and whatever else he wanted to do for the band. And I thought that was interesting, so I dug into his resume a little bit more. His name kept popping up. With a group named Blackfield. And then he was popping up with Marillion, with Rush, with Genesis, Gentle Giant, Jethro Tull. I'm like, why is his name connected with all these bands? So it turns out he was not only a smart and versatile songwriter, but he was also remixing all these classic prog albums in 5.1 surround. He was like the mixer rigueur for for
Yeah.
progressive rock at the time. I'm like, what the hell? Uh, and then I found out he also produced an album for Fish, the lead singer of Marillion, not the jam band.
Yeah.
Fish back in 1997. I'm like, this is weird. Did this stuff really escape my ears for this long? I'm like, okay, okay. Let me listen to Fear of Blank Planet like all the way through. And I was blown away, like completely blown away. The musicianship, the sound, all of it was like really revelatory, and I loved it. And that became like the album of choice for walking the dog during the pandemic. I'm like, cool, cool, that's cool. But what about their other stuff? I checked Spotify. Turns out at that point that they had 10 albums. I'm like, shit. Well, what if I hated the others? What if it, but that would it cloud my opinion of this one? Right? So every album post 2000 became an event for me. Tomorrow is the day I'm going to try and listen to a new one and see what happens. I ignored the earlier records after I read that they had like definitively changed their style
Yeah.
around that time from more of a ambient rock band to a band that actually writes melodies and songs. And every single album was eye opening, and they just got better. And then I got to this one. So did you know anything about this band at all before I
On
mentioned it?
No, I mean, the first time I had ever heard of them was when you started talking about them about 5 years ago. And I had kind of downloaded a couple of their albums, added them to my library, but I'd never really gotten around to like sitting down to listen to them. So
Okay.
occasionally one would come up in like a shuffle or something, but nothing that I ever really like sat down and listened to until we started doing this episode. Uh, Amazing. Like,
Yeah.
this is such a good album. I'm sad. Like, I'm kind of think I'm in the same boat as you. I'm sad that this has existed for as long as it has, and I didn't know about it.
Yeah, it's become a frustrating experience sometimes to know that that's still hanging out there and you're like, what's the deal? So Deadwing was released on April 26th, 2005 in the States, and because this is an English band and people still have limited appreciation for progressive rock in the United States, it was significantly more successful in Europe and in England.
Hmm.
Got to number 97 in the UK. Still not great, but sold pretty well for progressive rock in the first place, especially in 2005, right? Charted in
Yeah,
several European countries, and in the US, it cracked the top 200, got to number 132. It also got to number 4 on the Heatseekers chart. So it
yeah,
wasn't without fans. Critics, mainstream critics, who have always been iffy about progressive rock, were naturally iffy about progressive rock. Uh, However, there were some magazines that recognized it. Classic Rock Magazine named it their album of the year for 2005, and Sound and Vision Magazine, a rag devoted to home electronics, named this their number 2 album of the year and surround sound album of the year, kind of cementing his ability as
yeah.
that mixer. But before we spend a whole bunch of time talking about this album, we should take some time to talk about the band that made it, the person that made it, and then the band that made it,
Sure.
Porcupine Tree. So it's often referred to as, quote, the most important band you've never heard of. Porcupine Tree was founded in 1987 by Steven Wilson as a solo band. And perhaps we should start there with Steven Wilson, since he is the band more or less, especially for the first several years. He
Yeah.
was born in London in 1967, became interested in music when he was 8. He was gifted 2 albums for Christmas that year: Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd
Ooh.
and Love to Love You Baby by Donna Summer. You could not find 2 albums more diametrically opposed to each other than those 2. But it was in those 2 that he found his inspiration. He said that those 2 albums specifically shaped and influenced everything he has done since then.
Wow.
Right? That's kind of crazy. I mean, you're talking about a dance disco record and one of the all-time art rock albums in history.
Yeah.
Like, both of those things, joining together. He was forced to take guitar lessons as a kid, and he hated it. Eventually, his parents relented and let him stop, because you can rarely force a kid to enjoy something like that. You kind of have to
Yeah.
let them discover it on their own, which he then did. 11 years old, he finds a nylon string classical guitar in the attic, completely normal, that's what everyone does, and began experimenting with it. And his father, who was an electronic engineer by trade, designed a recording system for him, made a vocoder so he could mess around. And that will always spur on creativity in your kids.
Yeah.
Parents buying into your choices, not the choices that you forced on them, and assisting with that. If they make their own choices and then you're like, oh, let me help you, the kids are going to be like, oh, yeah, okay, great. And I think that's, I'm sure that had that was a big deal for him.
Yeah.
So then he had a bunch of other projects. I'm sure you have some of his projects there.
No, actually, I don't.
Oh, really? Oh, you didn't do
No,
anything? You.
I didn't really go super deep into Steven Wilson's background, to be totally
Okay, well,
honest with
then
you.
let me pick it
So
up. So
do
he
it.
was involved in a bunch of projects in the early 80s. He was in a psychedelic band called Altamont. He was in a progressive rock band called Karma and a new wave band called Pride of Passion that he was actually the keyboard player for. In 1987, he started to develop two separate projects at the same time. One was called No Man is an Island Except the Isle of Man,
Hmm.
which was eventually shortened to No Man.
No man.
This was it was an instrumental type band that focused on blending progressive rock with synth pop and would end up becoming more of an art pop thing for him, something that he continues to do. The other project was Porcupine Tree, which he imagined as more of a psychedelic rock thing and something on which he was really the only musician for. But here's the rub, and you mentioned this while we were talking before. The whole thing was supposed to be a big joke.
Yeah. He basically came up with this idea, like, what if there was this rock band from the 70s that nobody had heard of, like a prog rock band? What would their backstory be? What would they sound like? What albums would they have released? What would their music style be like? And then he took that and started to run with it. So he started to write songs and lyrics and music that would have gone on their albums. And then he started to write backstories for them, and he started to write, all of these details down about all who these people were. Like, some of my favorites were, in some of the backstory that he wrote, which we'll get to where that comes from in a couple of minutes. Uh, he came up with a bunch of details. He made an 8-page long inlay that could go inside of a cassette case that covered all the band's details, including some of the band members like Sir Tarkeen Underspoon
Mm.
and Timothy Tadpole Jones,
Mm-hmm.
which absolutely sound like names from a Monty Python sketch. But
100%.
totally understandable why you like this band.
Yeah, he made up all this stuff, like this backstory of them in and out of prison, and
Yeah.
he had he put enough money aside. He had his own studio equipment, and they kind of made this story, and they wrote music to provide evidence that this band existed. So he wrote
Yeah.
all this weird music from, like, okay, this is going to sound like it's from the 70s, and this one will sound like it's from the late 70s, and this one will sound like it's from this period. And he had treated vocals and experimental guitar playing. And so he had a guy with him who was working. His name was Malcolm Stocks, and they were kind of working together. And he would just offer ideas, but most of the stuff was being played, written, recorded by Wilson. So at this point, it's a joke. And Wilson's focusing on No Man, but he decided there might be some commercial appeal to this Porcupine Tree stuff. So, as you do, he wrote an 80-minute album
Yeah.
called
You know,
Tarquin's Seaweed Farm.
just for laughs.
And it was still ridiculous. So you mentioned some of them. So the names on the credits list were the Porcupine Tree, Sir Tarquin Underspoon, Mr. Jelly, the expanding Flan, Timothy Tadpole Jones, Sebastian Tweedle Blampton III, Solomon St. Germain, and Master Timothy Masters. So he sends the tape to a bunch of people he thought might dig it, and one of the people who did was Richard Allen, who was in the process of founding a new label called Delirium, and he was courting Porcupine Tree, although he really didn't know who it was, to join him. So in the meantime, the band released a second album called The Nostalgia Factory, and this time it's all Steven Wilson. Malcolm Stocks had moved on to other things by this point. So the band begins to gain some traction in underground circles as this mysterious nobody knows band, because most of the stuff that anyone knew about them was bullshit.
Yeah.
So nobody knows. So they agreed to to join this Delirium label as founding members of the label, and in May of 1992, they finally released their first real official record, uh, which isn't really. Their first
Mm.
record, On the Sunday of Life, was a double album compilation, what he considered to be the best tracks of those first two records. It was limited to 1,000 copies and then ends up selling 20,000 over time. So there's there's life in here somewhere, coming from somewhere. I think people are just enamored by the whole thing. So in June of 1993, their first proper album was released called Up the Downstair. It was originally supposed to be a double album, including one track called Voyage 34, but that was slimmed down to one album because Voyage 34 actually was the length of an entire record.
Yeah.
So he just nixed it. So Melody Maker calls this a psychedelic masterpiece, one of the albums of the year. And listening to the original version of it, it reminds me of some early Floyd and another band that I used to be interested in for a while, Osric Tentacles. And it also
Oh,
has
Osric Tentacles?
Osric Tentacles, yeah. So they were an instrumental progressive band that were releasing like one like we're releasing like an album every 8 months. They have so many flippin' albums, and they're
Wow.
kind of like they're kind of like fish with a ph, in that
Yeah.
they will play long extended songs, but they're not jammy. They're progressive. They're detailed and weird and
Huh.
it's very strange. But I was kind of listening to it for a while back then, and some of that stuff reminds me of that. So this album, Up the Downstair, has the first appearances of Colin Edwin and Richard Barbieri, guys that would soon become full members of the band. So the first two albums were beginning to gain some traction around this time. Wilson felt it was necessary to do some live shows to solidify what was happening. So he went back to who he knew and he asked Edwin to play bass, Barbieri to play keys, and he recruited Chris Maitland to be his drummer. So he played some shows, recorded and released a live album before returning to the studio, and they continued to work. In January 95, their first album to be released in the States was called The Sky Moves Sideways. And the album has been it's compared to Wish You Were Here by Pink Floyd for its structure, for some of its sound. I think it sounds a little bit different, but
Hmm.
as it should. But it was more or less a half solo, half band project. Prog bands and critics hailed them as the next Pink Floyd. And Wilson absolutely fucking hated that.
Yeah.
He said, I can't help that. It's true that during the period of The Sky Moves Sideways, I had done a little too much of it in the sense of satisfying, in a way, the fans of Pink Floyd who were listening to us, because that group doesn't make albums anymore. But moreover, I regret it. Like,
That's
mm,
that's always such a hard thing because the minute somebody says, "Oh, they're like, like the Pink Floyd of the 90s," was one of the quotes that I read about them. And it's like the minute somebody says that, you have just fucked them in every way possible. Because now if their next album sounds any different, people get pissed.
yep,
If their next album sounds exactly like a Pink Floyd album, people get pissed. If it sounds kind of like it, then people critique it for not sounding enough like Pink Floyd or sounding too much like Pink Floyd, or like it just becomes this, like, you say something like that and they're screwed,
yeah, because
which
what
is
kind of,
sad.
that's the most ridiculous amount of pressure you could put on anyone.
Yeah.
One of the all time bands in rock and roll history. You sound like them. Oh, no. Okay. So at this point, Steven Wilson's he's growing bored with the half solo, half band concept, and he wanted to be a proper band. So they worked on and off for the next year on the next record. They released their first proper single ever, a song called Waiting, that entered the indie charts in the UK, got fairly decent airplay. And the album Signify was released in September 96. And that album helped to solidify their fan base as they explored kind of more of a ambient rock sound with a whole band. In 1997, they released a live album called Coma Divine, and that was played in Rome to 5,000 people and was basically a goodbye concert to the Delirium label, as they felt
Hmm.
that label could no longer support the band as their kind of worldwide footprint continued to grow. In 1998, they spent all year writing and recording their next album. That next record, called Stupid Dream, represented a very significant shift in the sound of the band. So instead of writing in spurts over 2 years, they were writing in long writing sessions, like weeks at a time. and their songs started to evolve away from psychedelic ambient sound to more constructed songs with definitive melodies. Stupid Dream was released in March of '99 by Snapper K-Scope Records, who they had just signed with, and the reception was off the charts for progressive rock.
Yeah.
9 and 10-star reviews were the standard. It sold over 75,000 copies, a fairly significant amount for an unheralded progressive rock band in the late 1990s.
Yeah.
2005, Stupid Dream was ranked number 339 in Rock Hard Magazine's 500 greatest rock and metal albums of all time. Like it had good reviews. So the band was back a year later, riding the wave of this newfound popularity, and in May of 2000, they released Lightbulb Sun, and this album returned slightly more to the ambient sound, but he was trying to find a blend of those, the ambient and the melody-based.
Yeah.
And this album raised their critical success, sold more records, and their star was on the rise. They did 3 dates as a support band for Marillion. In June, they played a short U.S. tour, and they had a sold-out show in New York City. And then they announced that they had signed a new record deal with Lava and Atlantic Records. But not everything was okay in Porcupine Tree land at this point. In 2002, they made a move that changed their sound significantly and for the better, and it blows people's minds. So they fired drummer Chris Maitland, who had been with them since 93, 94, and replaced him with Gavin Harrison. Now, Gavin Harrison, and I do not say this lightly, because people know me, and people know that my wall, to the right of me right now, is covered with Rush and Neil Peart stuff. Gavin Harrison may be the best drummer I have ever heard.
Whoa! Can you say that one more time?
I mean, no one will ever knock Neil off the pedestal for me as the most important drummer in my life. But Harrison is just an amazing player. His use of dynamic elements, compositional drumming, don't cry.
I gotta clean my eyes out a little bit here.
And dexterity is unlike anything I've ever heard. And Neil, before he passed, was asked what drummers he looked up to at the time, and this guy was at the top of the list because
wow,
it's incredible. Are there faster players in the world? Sure. Are there more popular players? Definitely. But his ability to marry complex time arrangements, complicated patterns into places they wouldn't normally be, evolved their sound into something completely different. Call it prog metal, if you want, because it just totally changed the way they sound. So as they began to work on the next album, In Absentia, the direction the band was moving in was changing again, mostly because of Gavin Harrison. And Steven Wilson explained it this way. He said, In Absentia was all written before Gavin came on. Even the drum parts were kind of programmed. But it's one of those times, sometimes in life, when everything comes together. I'd written these songs. I was very much more interested at that time, having worked with Opeth, in the idea of combining a more brutal metal aspect into the fabric of our music. Gavin came along, and Gavin was a much different drummer to our previous drummer, Chris Maitland. He was much more of a powerhouse, and he was much more technical. He had more of a contemporary edge to his sound. So it was one of those really lucky things that he came in, played those songs, blew everyone away, and everyone just kind of came together. Everyone was listening to Gavin and saying, fuck, wow, we really need to step up our game now. So he raised the bar of the band. Now they're all like, we have to play as well as he's playing. And these songs evolve from that communication between all of them. So that album, In Absentia, was released in September 2002 to across-the-board critical praise, 9s and 10s, with the exception of one publication. Ugh. Rolling Stone gave it 3 out of 5 because they still don't get it. Still didn't get it, still don't get it. That something can be good even if you don't want to listen to it. I think that's the thing that bothers me most. I know in my heart that some country music is good. I just don't want to listen to it. And a good reviewer will be able to tell the difference between those two facts. Is it good? Yes. Do I want to listen to it? Not necessarily. because that's just not something that I enjoy listening to, but it doesn't make it bad. And then here's the problem. The actual words of the review, if you read the review, 3 out of 5, are actually incredibly complimentary. But how many people read it? They see 3 stars and go and move
Yeah.
on. And they go, that
That's
sucks. I'm not going to bother.
what's the thing with Yelp? Let's let 2,000 idiots decide where we're gonna eat for dinner tonight. 3 out of 5 stars. That place must suck.
Yeah, I'm not
Move
going
on to the
there.
next one. 5 stars. That place must be great.
So anyway, everyone else loved it. It sold
Yeah.
three times more in the U.S. than any other albums before. Sold over 120,000 copies. Very significant amount for this style of music. So in late 2004, the band reconvenes again to begin writing sessions for the album that we're going to talk about today, Deadwing. So this album was originally written as a companion piece to a screenplay that Steven Wilson had been working on with a gentleman named Michael Benyon. So it's a concept album, although not all the songs on the record are directly related to the story. Most are, but not all. Go ahead.
I did think that it was really interesting that he never calls it a soundtrack. He calls it a companion piece to the movie, because it's some of this music on this album absolutely would probably have been used as part of the soundtrack, but it never feels like it's soundtracky music.
Mm-mm.
You know what I mean? It feels much more like it is its own thing that would it tells its own story, and then it runs in parallel to the story being told in the film. I
Right.
thought that was really interesting.
So the album itself, the album is a ghost story, and it's a
Hmm.
narrative between a mother who dies tragically in a car accident and her trying to communicate with her living son, and kind of also her navigation through this kind of ghostly, ethereal world. It's wonderfully written and played. There's a lot going on.
Mm.
The album was released in March 2005 to critical acclaim again. Sales of the album surpassed those of In Absentia. People responded to the ongoing kind of musical evolution of the band. So the screenplay of the film they wanted to make, like you said, it's vastly different from what this album became as a result of the film kind of being in development hell for a long time and never got
Still is.
financing, right? Never got its financing. But the album retains some of the elements of that story, like the ghost story and the protagonist's name are the same. But a lot of the details are kind of an adjacent story to what the screenplay was actually written about.
Yeah.
So you want to talk about the album cover for a while?
Yeah, sure. So really simple album cover. It reminds me a lot of Babylon by Roxy Music.
Avalon.
It's Avalon. Sorry, I said Babylon, didn't I? Avalon.
Yeah.
Thank you. Damn it, I even knew that one. Anyways, it's like you just saw. It's a person standing in silhouette in front of a lake. They appear to be wearing a cape with some really big shoulder pads, maybe. I was hoping that somewhere there would be a picture like that was more not in silhouette, so you could see what they were actually wearing or what it was, but there's not really anywhere that I could find. The artwork and montage, quote unquote, is credited to Mike Benyon, who wrote the script with Steven, like we were just saying, and the photography is credited to Lassie Hoyle. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
I think it's Hoyle or Hoyle. Yeah,
Hoyle.
Hoyle.
Hoyle. Lassie's a Danish metal singer, artist, photographer, and film director. So kind of in that same vein with Mike Benyon and Steven, where they're all looking at the same things at this time: metal and filmmaking and art, and I feel like they're all kind of in that same bubble.
Yeah, he was the vocalist for the Danish death metal band Panzer Christ.
Yeah.
Very dark. And he also did live visuals for Dream Theater for a while. So because of that kind of death metal connection that he had, his visuals are predictably dark and interesting.
Yeah.
The inside of the album has these, treated photos of what we would assume to be the mother and son from the story of the record. It's very cool. It's part of the, full package of music that I miss with vinyl. This whole story and art story being written like this. It's really interesting and very haunting kind of look to it. I love it. So
Does it sorry to interrupt, but does
no,
it have like is it like a flip open cover style? I can't think what the gatefold.
it
It
is.
is cool. Oh,
Yeah, and there's all kinds of pictures, photos on the back. There's the kid
cool.
right there. Yeah, it's very
I was just
interesting.
curious because one of the other things I did think was really interesting is before Porcupine Tree started to actually make like albums that were a little bit more successful. Almost all of their earlier stuff seems like it was released on cassette first,
Mm.
but it also seems like it got like a lot of very like special edition treatment and limited edition. And a lot of those early releases were like I forget which EP it was that was like they only pressed 10 of them, and so they're like these incredibly rare like collectibles, but they're clearly made as like these are these incredibly rare collectibles.
He
But I
did
think
that.
that it's
He
oh, go
does
ahead.
that. So the Future Bites. No, I don't think it was either the Future Bites or the Harmony Codex. One of his two more recent
Hmm.
solo albums. He did that on purpose. It's he made one of them, one special edition that had all this shit with it, but he only made one and sold one. And part of the thing about the Future Bites, it has a song on it about commercialism, about I need the limited edition 140-gram vinyl, blah 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 blah. And he's talking about it, making fun of it, and then he goes and sells one of this special edition thing, basically saying, "See, see,
I mean, I kind of guessed he's somebody who understands the marketing. He understands both from the reality standpoint and from the ridiculous standpoint. But I think that it's very interesting that he does seem to take a lot of time and pick good designs and things all the way from the very beginning. So
yeah." So so I am obsessed with this band to some degree. And sometimes it's very difficult to explain to people who know me. Right? I've been
hmm.
listening to Rush for my whole life, and it is and always will be my first love and my favorite band. Like before I understood relationships or anything, this is what I loved. But this past year, you know how Spotify gives you your listening stats for the year, right? At the
Hmm.
end of the year, it wasn't even close for me. I listened to Porcupine Tree almost triple that I listened to any other band, including Rush.
Wow.
And I have a sweet spot for Rush. I love the '80s period of Rush, a time when old fans of the band began to abandon their sound and before they began to reinvent themselves once again. What I never cared for in the later years of Rush, with the exception of Clockwork Angels, was how much of their music at that point seemed stitched together. We talked about it when we talked about Hold Your Fire. That was episode
Hmm.
71 of Audio Judo. That Geddy Lee had started to use Pro Performer and was
Oh
able
yeah.
to manipulate pieces of songs around, and the songs began to seem stilted sometimes. There was no flow from one section to the other. It seemed jarring in places. When I listened to Porcupine Tree, that's the piece that is so present to me in their music. Even though they move between ridiculous time signature changes and pieces that you would seem don't flow together, they do. Also, he has this really unique take on melody, and I can only imagine that this has evolved from the fact that he listens to all types of music and plays all types of music. He
Yeah.
doesn't limit himself to just prog metal, but plays electronic stuff. He plays acoustic stuff and never limits it to this is Porcupine Tree and it has to sound like this, but lets the music kind of guide him and take him places. So it takes us places. So these songs are journeys, and I hope I get a few people out there to give them at least a chance with this album,
Yeah.
with this discussion. Just, give it a shot. It might not appeal to you all that much, but you very well could find something in their music that you find interesting enough to listen to.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I really think if nothing else, if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably interested in the same type of music that Matthew and I are generally interested in.
Mm-hmm.
Rock, 80s music, 70s, 80s, 90s, that era of rock and prog rock and whatever else. I don't even know how to generalize it right now. But like
Right?
these guys definitely sit as like a step beyond that. Just mostly because of the timing. I mean, yeah, they were making albums in the 90s, but like you said, their sound changed around 2000. And so to me, they kind of set as a step beyond that, but in that same category.
Mm-hmm.
They are rock, they are prog rock, they are a little metal. There's some songs on here that remind me exactly of System of a Down songs.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but they sit in this spot where it's like they're really fascinating. They're great, and they don't have a sound like anything else I've heard elsewhere. But also, they absolutely do have a sound like I've heard elsewhere, and that I like. So yeah, totally like revolutionary to me.
Yeah, so let's take a break and do a track by track.
All right, sounds good. We'll see everybody in a minute.
Cool. Today's show is brought to you by Atomic Podcast Services. Are you tired of spending hours hunched over your computer struggling to edit your podcast episodes? Do you want more time to create instead of editing? Well, we have the solution for you. Introducing Atomic Podcast Services, a premium podcast editing service that will take your show to the next level.
With Atomic Podcast Services, you can say goodbye to tedious editing tasks and hello to a polished, professional-sounding podcast. They will expertly enhance your audio quality, seamlessly remove background noise, and ensure every episode sounds crystal clear. But that's not all. As part of their premium service, they will also help you with ID3 tagging, scheduling, and posting of episodes, and for a little extra, even create engaging audiograms to promote your episodes on social media platforms. There's even a discount if you subscribe to their monthly services. With Atomic Podcast Services, you'll have more time to focus on what you do best, creating incredible content.
So why waste another minute struggling with complex editing software? Let Atomic Podcast Services take care of the technical side while you focus on captivating your audience. Visit their website at atomicpods, that's pods with a Z.com, to learn more and book your editing session today. Hello, this is Matthew from Audio Judo. Are you looking for additional Audio Judo content? Stuff that will make you laugh with an emphasis on music? Then you need to subscribe to our Patreon page, and this is how you do it. First thing, head to our site, patreon.com/audiojudo. Our Patreon site is the only place you're going to find all the extras that we work so hard to provide. There are Judo Chops, which are mini episodes. There are bits that are taken out of episodes for whatever reasons. Some bloopers, some full interviews with artists like Steve Hackett from Genesis. We have 3 tiers currently. There is the Shout It Out Loud tier, which would only cost you $1 in the US. For that amount, you get a shout out by name at the end of each episode. For $5 a month, little step up, the front row tier, you get a shout out in each episode, early access to full episodes, and access to all the bonus content. With a more significant investment, $20 a month, the backstage pass tier, you get everything that is available at the other tiers, a special personalized gift from Kyle and I. Most importantly, after paying for 1 year, you get to host an episode of Audio Judo with me and Kyle on the album of your choosing. We have completed several of these. They're a ton of fun. You can find the link to our Patreon account on our website, audiojudo.com. But if you can't find it there, it is patreon.com/audiojudo. Thanks for subscribing. And now back to the pro. Hey.
Welcome back.
Deadwing.
Name of the album, first track on the album makes sense.
Opening track of the record is almost 10 minutes long.
Yeah.
And it winds and stretches and turns all over the place, just like the train in the song that it talks about. The lyrics to the song do talk a bit about the ghost story that's present, but it also has allusions to the screenplay as well. Wilson explained that it was a screenplay about a man who had lived his life after an event that did not go as it was supposed to go. And that event altered his life from its intended path, and everything that happened from that juncture onward was completely wrong. So the event haunted him for life, and at the end of his life, something miraculous occurred, and he was brought back to the event and given the opportunity to live his life as it should have played out.
Oh.
So that is the premise of the screenplay, and there's way more to it. It has to do with he was an audio engineer, and he saw something or heard something in a tape, and there's all kinds of shit going on. But anyway, this song opens with the sound of a subway station over very ambient keyboard music. And if you listen really close before the band kicks in, you can hear someone say "Mind the Gap," which is a very London subway thing.
Yeah. Excuse me. London Tube.
Tube. Sorry, Tube. Tube.
Tube.
Guesting on this song on backing vocals and doubling the spoken word sections with Steven Wilson is Opeth's guitarist Michael Ackerfeld, and also legendary King Crimson guitarist Adrian Belew. So Wilson said that Adrian Belew contacted him about performing on the record. He said that when Neil Peart is writing about you in his books, which he did, and Adrian Belew is calling you and asking to play on your records, you don't say no. You say, okay, and you figure out a place for him to play. Like one of the legends of all time in prog music, King Crimson, it's either Fripp or Belew. He says, I want to play on your record. What do you say? Nah.
No, thank you.
No, thank you.
I think we're good. No. What?
Yeah, I don't. I just really don't have room for you on my album. So
yeah, maybe we could sneak you on one of the B sides or something. I don't know. Maybe.
Something a deep cut.
Look,
perhaps.
Why don't you send me a demo?
Yeah,
and we'll see.
So there's just so many musical twists in this song, and there's no chorus, zero chorus for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
It just winds its way through and plows through all these sections, and this, including this part right here. Did you know you're on the closed circuit TV? Smile at me. And the dream you had of your mom or dad on a beach somewhere, and the voice there with the cancer in a cigarette, take a lullaby, find a place to hide. And from the yellow windows of the last train, a spectre from the next life breathes his fog on the pain. I look with you into the speeding black rain. So there's these lulling, slow parts, these syncopated parts that are so good. And while this song really isn't truly about the ghost per se, it helps to explain some of what's happening. So the opening lyrics to the album are, something warm and soft just passed through here. It took the precious things that I hold dear. It rifled through the gray and disappeared. The creeping darkness makes the small hours clear. So that would be the ghost passing through him, the ghost of his mother, who had just passed in a car accident a long way from there, she being the precious thing he held dear. And it's just a great setup to this whole story, that you get it like right out of the gate, like you're already midway into the story. And there's go ahead.
I was just saying, I think this really is a great setup for this whole album, just because not only does it kind of lay everything out, it is this very long song that kind of gets you ready for everything else that's going to happen here.
Yeah, there's a lot going on, and then there's the Adrian Belew solo, which is suitably strange and discordant, something that he often did with Crimson. That's kind of his style. But what is so effective is the way the band falls out of it, right? There's no lull to rebuild the melody. It plows through that change effortlessly and just picks up right where they left it. And that solo and that change, it sounds like this. Tell me what you're thinking, Kyle. I know what
Oh
I
man,
think about it.
like I said, I think that it's really. Just kidding.
He was just kidding.
Just kidding. Coming into this like kind of blind, right?
Yeah.
Having heard your positive discussions about Porcupine Tree and
Mm.
not having really heard a lot of this before, coming into this, and I wasn't really paying attention the first time I listened to it. I didn't realize this is a 10-minute long song, and so I just started listening to it, and about 5 minutes I was like, this is really good, but is this still the same song? And I looked and I was like, yeah, sure enough it is. And so I was like, okay, cool, this is 10 minutes long, all right. But it's a lot of times when there's this, like, especially as an opener, there's something this long and something this detailed and something that kind of ebbs and flows and goes all over the place, I lose interest really quick. And it's a
Okay.
song that, like, I'll listen to once or twice when we're doing an episode about it. But after that, when I'm going through this album again, I'm like, going through an album again, I'm like, skip that one.
Right.
Listen to the first minute and then skip past it. But
Fast forward past it.
yeah,
Yeah.
fast forward past it. On the cassette, you gotta.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. Pick the needle up.
Yeah, on to the next track. But here, I like it enough that I think that will not be the case.
That's good.
I like it. It's very. I don't know what else to say about it. I like it.
That's good. That's good enough. You say that.
Yeah.
Say that. You like it. Shallow.
Shallow. So Richard Barbary
Mhm.
actually doesn't care for this track very much, and he said this. He said, "quote I tell you what I didn't like on Deadwing, and that's a track called Shallow. It's so out of context for Porcupine Tree. It really didn't feel like Porcupine Tree to me. It just had too much of a knowing sound to it. American kind of rock.
Knowing.
That wasn't that naivety about it or that honesty about it." I thought that was very interesting because he's literally saying, "Hey, that song that everybody. This was kind of the hit from this album, in a
It
way.
sounded like the hit. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it sounded like the hit. It got some radio play, and it turns out that was intentional. Stephen later said in an interview that this was recorded at the request of the record label to make something that was a little more radio friendly so that they would have something to market with. And I think it's interesting. It's not a bad song by any means. It's a very good song. I think this is one of the songs that doesn't fit really well on this album.
Oh, it
And
doesn't.
if it was left off, you wouldn't really lose anything. I also don't think it necessarily fits within the narrative story of this album.
It
I
doesn't.
think it's kind of tacked on a little bit. But all that being said, the lyrics are great. It sounds really cool. It's a decently listenable song. It just doesn't quite fit here.
Yeah, it's for sure the most metal song on the record. And to double
Yes.
down on the Richard Barbieri stuff, Steven Wilson referred to it as a shit song. He said, like, this is the big rock moment of the record. An irresistible riff with a Zepp or Soundgarden vibe to it, the equivalent of a big dumb rock song, but in the way that people who are not dumb would do it. And I don't think it fits into it. I mean, if you're saying it does fit into it, the song seems to be about like social phobia, not being
Mhm.
able to relate to people in real life. The lyrics, I live to function, on my own is all I know, no friends to mention, no distraction, nowhere to go. Seems pretty cut and dry, right? If you go to any of the Porcupine Tree chat rooms, though, and I only go there to see what other people think of it. Everyone seems to think this has some tenuous connection to the ghost story. That he's in love with his mom, and this whole story is some sort of incestuous thing. Why? Do people think it is impossible to love your mother without being in love with your mother?
Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar.
If it is about the ghost story, if we're trying to make a tenuous connection to it, all he's saying is that he can't cope at the moment without that particular love in his life, the love of his mother.
Yeah.
And if it isn't part of the ghost story, then it's just a song about social isolation. And the song, it sounds like this. So my favorite part of the song is how it moves effortlessly between the hard and the soft, kind of that metal sound, and then it backs off a bit. Choruses are really loud and aggressive, and the verses are kind of very smooth and lilting. And this is one of the things that makes me want to listen to these songs over and over again because there is so much new stuff to find every time you sit down and listen to it. Oh no.
Yeah, it. You can still hear me, right?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So it's just the video's frozen.
Yep.
Yeah. So I definitely think that this is a, going back to what you were talking about before. I saw some of those speculations as well. Like, how
Yep.
does this song fit into this album? And to me, it's like, even if you did want to fit it in here, it's really simple. It's like, it's somebody who's just gone through a traumatic death and they're socially isolating themselves. That's the whole story. Maybe they've isolated themselves from somebody who loves them. Doesn't necessarily need to be their mother. Could be somebody that they were in love with that they broke up because they're going through something horrible. Like, it just didn't make any sense to me. A lot of the speculation of like, oh no, it's this, it's this deeper relationship that he has to have with his mother, and it has to be this, has to fit in like this, and it has to, I think sometimes, especially in situations where people picture there is a smart musician, or there's somebody who is very good at what they do as a storyteller or a maker. They can't fathom this idea that all the parts don't fit together.
Mm.
You know what I mean? So
Mm-hmm.
it's like, the way that this fits in here, according to Steven himself, is we made a radio friendly song to appease the, label.
Sure.
But people can't accept that. They have to have this, like, well, no, it has to fit. All the puzzle pieces must fit in here. So how do they fit in here? Well, they're gonna, you know, stretch and reach and pick everything out. So
Yeah. No,
kind of unfortunate, but
that's exactly right. Like, and they're going to dig twice as deep to find something lyrically that makes a
yeah.
connection to the story. Even if he's just like, oh, no, I just wrote these lyrics. I wasn't really intending it to be part of it. No, it's got to
Yeah.
be in there. It has to. So, yeah. So Lazarus.
Lazarus.
Right. Hey, we got a hit in Germany. And by hit, I mean that it reached number one, or not number
Ooh.
91 on the
Oh.
German singles chart. By comparison, the song Looking for Freedom topped the German charts for 1 week in 1988. That song was written and performed by David Hasselhoff,
Oh.
furthering Norm Macdonald's theory that Germans love David Hasselhoff.
It's a pretty
So,
good theory if you
yeah,
think
right?
about it.
It's the prettier side of Porcupine Tree, the gentler side.
Hmm.
And like Rush had a few songs that appealed to ladies, this is one that interests a lot of women. There was always a running joke at Rush concerts about trying to figure out how many of the women at the show were there with their boyfriends and how many of them were there of their own free will. Wink, wink, free will. I did that on purpose. Not many. Not
Yeah.
many were. So this song was written a few years before this record when Wilson recorded a first demo, included it on one of his No Man albums. He revisited it for this album, changed the middle eight, included his bandmates to fill out the sound, and this is the result. It's a beautiful song with plenty of prog changes in what appears on the surface to be just a ballad-ish song.
Hmm.
In the context of the story, this is where David is actually hearing from his mother from beyond the grave, reaching out to guide him.
Yeah.
He's riding a train home through the fog. We learn from this song that the main character of the story is named David, and she's trying to help him. The lyrics to that section are, "My David, don't you worry, this cold world is not for you. So rest your head upon me, I have strength to carry you." So it's a brilliant adaptation of the Lazarus story.
Yeah.
So for those who don't know, Lazarus of Bethany was a friend of Jesus Christ. He had been very sick. Jesus' disciples tried to get him to go see Lazarus for days and heal him, but Jesus refused, telling him that he would go to sleep, but essentially be fine. And he was not. Lazarus passed away and he was entombed. Jesus then arrived after Lazarus had been dead for 4 days. Notice the difference between Jesus' third day resurrection. They didn't want those stories conflating with one another. Those smart guys at the Council of Nicaea who decided on the narratives of the Bible. Yes, I said it, decided. Jesus then raised Lazarus from the dead and embraced him. Yay! And there's so many shitty explanations on those message boards that are trying to say that David's family is trying to coax him into suicide so he can join them in death, but Lazarus raised. What? So it didn't make any sense, right? Lazarus raised from the dead, people. His family wants to
Yeah.
get him back to the land of the living, not join them in death. They want him to stop grieving for them in his loss. It's time to stop being walking dead in your grief and get back to your life. And she said that you don't have the strength to do this by yourself. I will carry you through it. I will help you through it to get you through this grief. It's actually a wonderful take on that story.
Yeah,
And
it is.
and it sounds like this.
I survived against the will of my twisted folk. But in the deafness of my world, silence broke. Follow me down to the valley below. Moonlight is bleeding from out of your soul. Follow me down to the valley.
So, and while the song is gentle and melodious,
Hmm.
don't let Gavin Harrison fool you. The part that he is playing is still ridiculously complicated, um, but it's so very smooth. It's such a great song. What do you got about that song? Gotta have something, right?
I mean, I like that it's this reimagining of the traditional Lazarus, story. I thought that was really
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, I do also think that it's an interesting idea. A lot of people suggested as well that this was that David was contemplating suicide.
Yeah.
So the idea of the train being this one-way path that you're on, where you're going wherever it takes you, and you can't get off unless you were to just kill yourself as a narrative for life, right?
Hmm.
Because you're on this train, you're going wherever the train goes to. You can't get off, wherever you feel like, unless you take your own life.
Hmm.
And here being the idea being obviously that the way you take your own life is committing suicide. But then his mother steps in and says, hey, this isn't for you. You're not ready to end your life. This isn't, the afterlife isn't for you yet. Stay in life. There's more for you to do.
Right. I
It's
can
kind of a
see that.
beautiful story.
It's a great story. It's definitely a song that kind of catches your ear as you're listening to this whole thing because it stands out so much differently than a lot of the other songs.
Yeah.
Halo.
Halo.
This song is a jam, right? It's loud and noisy. Also has some of the most interesting playing in their catalog, and it's another takedown of organized religion.
Yeah. Your
Songs,
favorite.
yeah, right. And I love this. So it's all about a friend of Stephen's. So this is an actual true story of, who had become a born again Christian, who was constantly bringing that up whenever they talked about anything, as they do. You will find a lot of Reformed Christians want you to know that they have changed their lives, and you would be a better person too if you just did the same. Such a big part of that movement is proselytizing. It's part of the demand. Those churches are usually referred to as Acts 2 churches because they hang their hat on a part of the Bible that is the second book of the Acts of the Apostles, where the mandate is to go out and spread the word to everyone and convince them that this is the way. So they talk about it exclusively, almost deferring to any other topic as long as it leads back to that all the time. And that's what these lyrics represent. This is one of those songs that really doesn't relate to the ghost story specifically. The lyrics like this: you can be right like me, with God in the whole, you're a righteous soul. I got a halo around me, I got a halo around me. I'm not the same as you, because I've seen the light, and I'm gaining in height now. That's the whole thing. It's devastatingly accurate. Like
Yeah.
so on the damn button with with that attitude, and it's incredible, and it sounds a little bit like this.
Your mom joke a day.
That's all you get. So, two parts musically really to talk about here. The bass part, so good, different, groovy, played by Colin Edwin, who had joined Wilson as a guest player years ago. He would end up remaining with the band until about 2011, when Steven Wilson decided to just play all the bass parts on the album himself. So now he plays with some weirdo experimental jazz band. Stuff's interesting, but it's very strange. The other thing to talk about is that this is the only song credited to all 4 members of the band.
Yeah.
Apparently, Gavin Harrison had developed a groove for the song, and the whole song was built around that. And of course, that part is the middle section that I just played, and it's in 17/16 time signature. Because why not? So I did a cursory search to see what other songs in popular music were in that time signature. And the only one I could find was the song Discipline by King Crimson. Who's a member of King Crimson playing on this record? Adrian Belew.
Adrian Belew.
And who played the guitar solo on this song? Adrian Belew.
Very interesting.
It all comes together.
All comes
It's
back.
such a great freaking song, though. And that rhythm that he plays, I try every morning on the way to work to play to it on my steering wheel. I can't fucking do it. I can't figure it out. So whatever. I guess
I love. Oh, go ahead.
No, I have nothing else.
I was say I love the underlying themes here of weaponizing religion and religious violence, because it's a subject that doesn't get touched on very frequently. But like the idea that the one thing I did find very interesting here is, do you think this is more from David's perspective or from a third party's perspective singing to David, the protagonist?
Yeah, I don't think they're singing to David.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think nothing that I could suss out in the storyline convinces me that David was a born again Christian at this point. So that would be a stretch for me.
Okay.
And I feel like it's either it's standalone, or maybe he's talking to someone else who's trying to be like, oh, your mom's in a better place. God had a reason to take her. The same shit, they tried on me for years and years. Like, oh, your mom, God needed your mom in heaven because she's just a light. I'm like, well, if he needed a light, then why wouldn't he leave her here? Because it sounds like she could have done a hell of a lot more good here than up there. That doesn't make any sense to me. So I feel like that would be, if it is part of the storyline, that's what it'd be like. Like, hey, God will help you through it. And he's like, how? So yeah, there you go.
That makes sense.
Arriving somewhere,
But
not here.
No.
It's the centerpiece of the album. 13-minute sprawling song has everything that makes this band so good. Quiet moments, aggressive guitars, really complex patterns, interesting lyrics. There's so much going on here. And the song, very simply put, by Steven Wilson, is getting to a point in your life that you never expected to be at and learning how to deal with it. It has all these allusions to what the last seconds of your life would be like and whether or not you could imagine those moments actually happening. The lyrics of this song, they use imagery to kind of describe how incomprehensible it is to die as it exists in our consciousness. So the line is, did you ever imagine that the last thing you'd hear fading out was a song? So it kind of gets this image of your head of looking up at a shattered windshield, covered in blood, with the interior of the car all kind of weird, some stupid pop song playing on the radio, because of course the radio is still playing. That never stops when you're in a car accident.
Yeah.
Completely indifferent to the death of the narrator, who of course feels like the world should stop now that they have, because you can't imagine it any other way. It's just it existential crisis to boot.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on. So, and musically, there's a blend of things to choose from. This is the very bruising metal middle part of the song. It's so good. And I love, again, I've said this, their ability to reconcile that very hard, aggressive middle part and fall back into a melody. No stopping and rebuilding to rejoin it. Just boom, there it is. And it takes a lot of musical trust to pull something like that off. But then earlier in the song, and I did this purposely in reverse, earlier in the song, there's this beautiful chorus. Sweet melody with amazing vocal work, and it's simple. For as complex, 13 minutes long as this song really is, this chorus is simple, short, expertly placed in the context of the song, and lyrically it says that everything I've planned for in my life didn't happen, and now I have to deal with what I have in front of me. And that part sounds like this.
All my designs simplified. And all of my plans compromised. And all of my dreams sacrificed.
That is some real Eric Johnson sounding guitar right there.
Yeah. That part, that solo is played by Michael Akerberg from Opeth, who sang earlier. And I love the admission that Steven that said about the needs of the song, the needs of this song outweighing what the band requires. He said, he was a no-brainer because I knew Michael through the Opeth records. He's a good guitar player. He's amazing. I wanted to have him on the record. And another reason that I have him there is because when Gavin replaced Chris Maitland, Chris was the only other singer in the band. So there's been this need to have other vocal textures to join with my vocals to make harmonies. So you bring them in because that's what serves the song. Not because, hey, people want to play on your record, or hey, I need to get a collab going. No, you do it because the song, it serves what he's trying to do, and it's such a great song. I mean, yeah, you got time for 13 minutes. This is the song you want to listen to.
You mean this is not a Pitbull DJ Khaled moment.
Yo, can I play on
DJ
your record?
Khaled,
Yeah.
can I play on your record?
I love that song. This song. So Mellotron Scratch.
Mellotron Scratch. So I am kind of curious to know if so Halo arriving somewhere but not here,
Mhm.
and then Mellotron Scratch. I get the feeling that these are kind of three pieces, even though arriving somewhere but not here is so long. I kind of get the feeling that this is continuous.
It could
I
very
mean,
well
obviously
be.
they're one right after the other on the album, so obviously
Yep.
they're a little continuous from that. But I get the feeling that this could have been one even longer song.
It's very possible. You never know what he's doing. But while I think the previous song is the best song on the record, I think that this is the most interesting song on the record.
Hmm.
It's got a different vibe to it. There's a lot of things going on. It's hard to follow for sure, but it's so great when you do and you figure it out. So we take a part of the stuff behind the song. We get this. Steven Wilson said that he wrote this song about a girl who used to cry at the sound of a mellotron.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of just leaving it at that and just making a love song, he weaves it into the ghost story. He uses that love part, but ties it to the last song with the red mist from the car crash that killed his mom. David, in the screenplay, he's an audio specialist. That was his career, so he would have some knowledge about a mellotron.
Mm-hmm.
So a mellotron we'll just give you a quick background on it. Electromechanical musical instrument developed in England in 1963. It's played by pressing keys. Each one causes a length of magnetic tape to contact a capstan, which pulls it across a playhead tape. As the key is released, the tape is retracted by a spring to its initial position. So you can put different sounds, right? So more specifically, though, one magnetic audio tape assigned to each key. Each tape is 8 seconds in length and plays when its respective key is pressed. But it makes a weird scratching noise when something is wrong with the tape. Hence, mellotron scratch. The line in the song, the scratching of a mellotron, doesn't refer to the sound. It refers to any kind of anything that's not working properly.
Yeah.
So this is what's upsetting the woman mentioned in the song. Something in the relationship isn't working properly. Yeah. And this is how we referenced it. Go ahead.
I wrote down basically that same description, but I said that the idea here is that where you have this normal behavior, like pressing the key on the mellotron, results in some abnormality, like a weird scratching noise. Like, I should press this and it should go mip, mip, mip. But instead it goes something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So something's just not right.
Yeah.
And then musically, it's another complicated song. But the part I want to play, because the song is very complicated, is the last section with these vocal harmonies that just show a completely different side of Steven Wilson's genius. He was a big Beach Boys fan. He's mentioned it before. So there's a lot of that kind of element going on in a progressive rock sense. It sounds like this. It's just world apart from other stuff on the record.
Yeah.
There's just so much depth to what the work that he's doing. There's so many layers to it. And besides that, it's absolutely fantastically mixed. It just sounds so good.
That is one thing. He definitely, like, knowing that he has this real life audio engineering experience, that he's like the guy that does 5.1 mastering for so many prog rock musicians and things. And at the time he was doing it, in the late 90s, early 2000s, that had become the big thing to do. It's very interesting to me to see that he actively fought against the loudness wars.
Yes.
And actively was like, he even considered, I forget if it was this album or the one previous to it, where there's a note where he considered making the liner notes like a screed against, like, hey, just so you know, this is not going to sound as loud as the other albums in your collection. It's not going to sound as loud as a pop album because this is how you get depth out of an album. This is how you actually make an album where you can pick out individual instruments instead of just being louder than everyone else who's playing their music right now.
Right.
And I was like, that's somebody who really, like, he knows
gets it.
that pain.
Yeah.
He knows that pain of just like, we went to all this work to make this sound beautiful, and then some studio has like, yeah, great, boost it by 20% and put it out, it'll be fine, you know. And you're just like,
Everybody's
no,
gonna love it.
everybody's gonna love it. It's got to be louder than everything else. Just boost that up there, put that out, it's fine.
Why did he get New York all of a sudden?
I don't know, it just happens.
Okay.
That's who I expect. That's who in my brain studio
Is mixing
executives
all
are.
or all making all music decisions ever?
Exactly.
That guy? Yeah.
Yeah.
Open Car.
Open Car. This is the track on here that does absolutely remind me of System of a Down.
Mm.
You can really hear it in this track. I don't know whether that's intentional or not, but you can hear it here.
Hard to say. So this song makes more sense in the context of a screenplay than a rock album because it would make a hell of a video narrative within a movie. So the song is about this seemingly toxic relationship with David and his girlfriend in the screenplay. She is named as Elizabeth. And it reads like a movie. He lusted after her from a distance, then they got close, then they had sex, and after the sex it was weird and awkward because they had been friends and had great times together, and now he can't stand to be with her. And he remembers the good times that they had. The lines are hair blown in an open car as the dress slips down her arm. It's just it's a nice day, but all the stuff he's singing about in the verses just points to this toxicity. The lines are, okay, what's next after the sex? What do we do now? Finding the time, drawing the line, and never crossing it. Gave her the hours, gave her the power, cannot erase her. Gave her the truth, gave her the proof. I gave her everything. And the music itself points at these two worlds he's living in. The verses are syncopated and abrasive, representing these really hard-edged emotions. And then the choruses are bigger and wider, more wide open. And the song, it sounds like this. What do you think about that, Kyle?
I like it. I like it a lot. I like System of a Down too, though. So
That helps.
It fits right in with that. Yeah. But I think this is definitely like you said, this is definitely something that's pulls more, I think, from the script of the film.
Yep.
Not in a way where, again, it wouldn't like be part of the soundtrack necessarily, but it is pulling from that narrative of the script and like turning part of that storyline into a song. And I personally think it continues into the next song.
I think
But
you're
I'm
right.
curious to know what you want to think.
Yeah, I think you're right. I wish I could. Part of the problem I'm having, and I kind of labored over this for a while. I wish I could play more music from these songs because there's so much more in 5 minutes. This 5-minute song that I can explain in 45 seconds. So our music clips usually work for our show because it's usually indicative of the songs in most ways. But I feel like this doesn't even really begin to do this record justice because if I'm pulling 30 seconds, 45 seconds out of a clip of a 13-minute song, like how much am I really representing? Because it isn't like verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, end. Like they're not structured that way. So it's hard to I want to find something that represents the whole song, but people really just need to go listen to it.
Yeah. I mean, in this case, that doesn't exist. So you can't really be like, here's a snippet that will give you a feeling for this whole song. It's like, here's a snippet that will give you a feeling for that snippet of the song.
That snippet of the song.
And
right.
then the rest of it is totally different or something completely, off the wall. So
and to piggyback on what you said, yes, I believe that this is the next song, the start of something beautiful, is the culmination of the last song,
Cool.
where they argue, tell each other what they really think of each other in anger, and ultimately break up. And he does it in these backhanded, vicious ways that only people that are really trying to hurt one another would actually do, like a real breakup in a relationship. The lyrics to the chorus tell you what you need to know. The more I show the way I feel, the less I find you give a damn. The more I get to know, the less I find that I understand. Innocent, the time we spent, forgot to mention we're good friends. You thought it was the start of something beautiful. Well, think again. And then they take some legit shots at each other. He says, in my mind anyway, he says that mother lost her looks for you. And he responds with, well, father never wanted you. It's really nasty, and they're trying to hurt each other. But you're like, shit. When you start to break down what he's really trying to say in this song, yeah, you're like, okay, fuck, that's tough.
Yeah.
And then musically, it's such a creative song. It's co-written by the drummer. So you get these changes, all these rhythmic changes with this beautiful melody wrapped around it. It's strange but cool. And it sounds like this. So cool.
Yeah, it is absolutely, though. If you read the lyrics, it is a brutal argument. Like it's it's bad, but really good.
Yeah.
I like this song.
It's a horrible argument, but it is the culmination. So Glass Arm Shattering is the last song. Wasn't intended to be the last song. The last song was supposed to be a song called Half Light, which appears in all the special editions, and Steven Wilson kicks his own ass about that. He says he regrets it to this day that he didn't have that song in the record, but had this one. And this sounds way more like Porcupine Tree used to sound.
Yeah.
This is more atmospheric, more Pink Floyd-like. It's got heavy keys, got real heavy key, ambient sounds. But it is coming to grips with his mother's death and being aware of her presence in his life. So yeah, maybe musically it doesn't sound like the rest of the record. Lyrically, it kind of does. And it has this classic build, but it never really explodes like earlier points on the record. It just kind of, it meanders. And that's always been the word that I used for most of Pink Floyd's career, except for maybe The Wall. Meander. They travel around. They go from here to there because they were essentially a jam band back in the 60s with a ink blot light show. They just play for hours. And that's essentially what, they're just, it's very atmospheric. It's a mood. And
we got an overhead projector.
Yeah.
We got an overhead projector and some food coloring. Check this out.
Right, and that's exactly what it was. And the song, it sounds like this. I'll listen to the whole damn thing again, Randy. I don't care. So some might say that this isn't really a fitting end to the record. That because of the clamor, kind of the noise of the whole record, this song seems to be a bit of a letdown. But I like to believe that this is the way to end it. So if it is a screenplay, then the climax doesn't come at the very end of the movie anyway. It's just before the end of the movie
Yeah.
in the next to last song, because you need the finishing part of the movie. Everyone walks away at the end, and there's the sunset, and boo boo boo. Yeah, there it's all over.
That definitely feels like this song.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying, and that's what. So everyone in, even him, like I understand he's the creator. Maybe he wanted it to end a different way, but everyone in the chat room is like, it needed to be this. It should have been this. It should have been that. I'm like, shut up. You weren't there, and just listen to the lyrics. This is the lyrical resolution of the album. That he's accepting it.
I also kind of thought too that, like, not only is it that acceptance of, like, my mother is now passed away, I need to get on with my life, but like this could be when she actually dies. So like there's all these themes throughout the album of, flashing back through your life when you're dying, and what do you see before you die, and you hear music, and he's dealing with all this trauma and everything.
Yeah.
What if that is all speculation up to the point, or like a premonition almost, until this point where this is actually her dying? This is actually her getting hit by the car and dying at the end of this album. And it's all up to this point a premonition of that happening to her.
I kind of dig that.
I thought that was pretty cool.
I kind of dig that. That's a cool look at that concept, that it was all just up to now. Yeah. I dig it. I'm glad that I was indulged for a bit, because I absolutely love this record.
Man, I don't think it was an indulgence at all. This is a great album. I really think that, like I said, I'm sad that this is, Porcupine Tree is something I'm just discovering now-ish.
Me too.
Could have been listening to them for years.
Yeah.
I definitely think that this is worth your time to go listen to. I think some of their other albums, I have not really had a chance to listen to too many of them, but I think I'm definitely going to in the near future.
If I could recommend In Absentia and Fear of a Blank Planet, you're going to love.
Yeah.
You're absolutely going to love. And The Incident is also a great record too. And I'll let you know how I got my fingers crossed. So I'm going to see him. He's touring. He's doing a solo tour. The closest he gets to Vegas is Denver. So I'm going to go see him in Denver in September on his solo tour, and I'm just hoping and praying like he pulls some Porcupine Tree songs out and plays a couple of those, because that would really be cool. But
yeah, that would be cool.
We'd like to know what you guys think of this record.
Yes, please.
You guys fans of Porcupine Tree? Have you heard of Porcupine Tree? Have you heard of porcupines? Like,
do you own porcupines?
Do you
raise and care for porcupines? Can you tell us about porcupines?
Have
you ever been stung by a porcupine?
Or
have you ever eaten at the Porcupine Grill?
Oh,
just.
So we want to know. So you can get a hold of us at facebook.com/audio judo, or Instagram at audio_judo, or TikTok at audio judo. You could get a hold of us at info@audiojudo.com. Send us an email there. Simon, our UK consultant, sent us another email, and I read it, part of it, to Randy today, but I didn't read it. I didn't bring it with me. So I'll read it next time. YouTube.com/@audiojudo. You can also find us there and send us some information, but we have Patreon followers as well. Go ahead, Kyle.
Yeah, I was about to say too, if you're not familiar already, we have been live streaming these as we've been recording them. Usually happens on Tuesday nights around 7:30 p.m. Pacific time in the US. So every other Tuesday ish. So if you guys want to keep an eye open for that, we try to like post about it a little bit. I'm sure Matthew's going to start posting on the old TikToks there.
I did already.
Nice. Sweet. So if you want to see it completely unedited and all the burps and farts left in place, you can try. But we've also got some shout out to our Patreons. Like you mentioned, Simon C., our UK consultant, and Diane, both at the Shout It Out Loud tier. Thank you both so much. John R. at the Front Row Seats tier. Thank you so much. Christian S., David W., Kristen K., Michael A., Michael S., and Scott K, all at the Backstage Pass tier. Thank you all so much. We could not do this without all of your support.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have albums coming up by In Excess,
Ooh.
Jamiroquai,
Mm.
Fishbone, Genesis. That's currently on the schedule right now. So other than that, we'll talk to everybody in 2 weeks, but go listen to this record, Deadwing by
Yes,
Porcupine
please.
Tree. Go listen to it. Let us know what you think. Other than that, we will talk to you guys soon, and thank you so much.
Take care.